Well, hello. Sometimes we need to just take a moment and think deeply together. And I would like to do that with you today as we look at a scripture found in the New Testament. Think about the implications of how we can apply this, to situations where we feel tormented sometimes in our mind or we feel anxious. So here's our scripture, 2 Corinthians 12:9. My grace is sufficient for you. My grace is sufficient for you. That's what God is saying to us in this scripture. The scripture was spoken by the Apostle Paul when he was describing a time where he was going through mental torment. He actually said there was a messenger sent by Satan to torment me. And 3 times I asked it be removed from me, and it didn't stop. But the Lord said to me, Paul, my grace is sufficient for you. And, as I've pondered this scripture, one of the things that really impacted me was the thought of what would the enemy torment Paul about? Some people believe that this was his thorn in the flesh and that it was a sickness. If that's what you want to believe, that's fine. But the scripture is actually translated as a messenger of Satan sent to torment. And as I began to ponder this deeply, I realized that what would Paul be tormented by? This was the man who held the coats of those who were stoning Christians to death. This is a man who persecuted the church tremendously and tried to destroy it at the beginning of his ministry. And I believe that what was going on here is that he was being tormented by his former mistakes. Has that ever happened to you, where there's something you did in the past and you just struggle because, this just comes back to me again and again and again. And yet listen to how the Lord answered Paul. Imagine this with me. He's being tormented in his mind about things that happened in the past. And he tries to rebuke it. He tries to get rid of it. But God says simply, my grace is sufficient for you. 2 Corinthians 12:9. You see, this brings us to the center of the gospel. You either believe in the grace of God, and that is enough for every sin you would have committed now, any sin you will commit in the future, or you're always trying to earn God's love. And so if you're tormented by past mistakes, what does it mean? It means that you're not really applying his grace to it. One day God really brought this home to me. I had volunteered to help in our church, and we had communion, and we had those little tiny cups that you fill for everybody. And I had never done it before. And I was in the kitchen trying to pour the little grape juice into the cups. And I didn't know that there's a special bottle that you can use to squirt the juice in and not make a mess. I was trying to pour it out of the jug, and I had this grape juice everywhere. It was on the counter, it was on the floor, it was on me. And all of a sudden the Lord spoke to me. I looked down at this mess, and the Lord said, this is like my grace. This is like my grace, Wendy. And those times where you felt tormented about things you've made mistakes with in the past, you actually can't out-sin my grace. You just need to allow it to spill all over those things that you feel like you're tormented by. So that changed my life that day. So I hope that you will allow God to spill his grace all over anything that's tormented you from your past. Why? Because he says, my grace is sufficient for you. Thanks for joining me today.